The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landing pad as Dr. Han checked his watch for the fifth time in 10 minutes. The historical significance of today wasn't lost on him. Humanity's first official meeting with representatives from another world. As Earth's top xenobiologist, he had spent years studying theoretical alien biology, but nothing could have prepared him for the real thing. "Nervous?" asked Director Park, the head of the international diplomatic team. "Wouldn't you be?" Dr. Han replied, adjusting his tie. "We've spent decades sending signals into space, hoping someone would answer. Now they have." The sleek Ceridan vessel had entered Earth's orbit 3 days ago. After preliminary communications, they had agreed to send down a small delegation. Dr. Han and 6 others had been chosen to meet them: politicians, linguists, and scientists representing Earth's united front. "Remember the protocol," Director Park said. "Formal greetings only. No sudden movements. Follow their lead for any ceremonial exchanges." Dr. Han nodded, his mouth dry. He had memorized the briefing materials, but paper knowledge felt woefully inadequate now. A soft hum filled the air as the Ceridan ship descended. It was smaller than expected, about the size of a private jet, with a pearlescent surface that seemed to shift colors in the sunlight. The craft landed without a sound, hovering slightly above the ground before settling onto the pad. For several long moments, nothing happened. Then, with a soft hiss, a doorway appeared in the side of the vessel, unfolding into a short ramp. "Here we go," whispered Dr. Han. The first figure to emerge was tall and slender, moving with fluid grace. Ambassador Nara, as she had introduced herself in their communications, had skin that shimmered with a faint blue luminescence. Her features were almost human. 2 eyes, though larger and more widely spaced, a small nose, and a mouth that curved into what appeared to be a smile. Her 4-fingered hands were long and elegant, and she wore what looked like flowing robes of a material that seemed both solid and liquid at once. Behind her came 4 other Ceridans, each with subtle differences in height and coloration. They formed a small semicircle at the bottom of the ramp. Director Park stepped forward, bowing slightly. "On behalf of the people of Earth, we welcome the representatives of the Ceridan Federation to our world." The translator devices they all wore converted his words into the musical language of the Ceridans. Ambassador Nara inclined her head. "The stars have guided us to each other," she replied, her voice melodic even through the translation. "The Ceridan Federation extends hands of friendship to the people of Earth." She stepped forward, and Dr. Han noticed her movements had a weightless quality, as if gravity affected her differently. The diplomatic team had been briefed on Ceridan customs, including their formal greeting ritual, which involved a specific type of hand contact. Director Park exchanged the greeting first, extending his right hand palm up. Ambassador Nara placed her 4-fingered hand lightly against his, palm to palm, and closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she smiled. "Your world's energy flows strongly," she said. One by one, the Earth representatives stepped forward for the greeting. Dr. Han was last, his heart pounding as Ambassador Nara turned to him. "Dr. Han, our scientists are particularly interested in speaking with you," she said. "Your research on biological adaptability has reached even our distant worlds." Dr. Han felt a flush of pride. "I'm honored. I have many questions for your scientists as well." "Then let us begin with proper introduction," she said, extending her hand. Dr. Han reached out, placing his palm against hers. Immediately, he felt a subtle warmth spreading from the point of contact. The sensation was pleasant, like dipping his hand into sun-warmed water. Ambassador Nara's eyes, large and deep violet, widened slightly. "Your life energy is remarkable," she said, maintaining the contact longer than she had with the others. Dr. Han felt a slight tingling sensation, almost electrical, travel up his arm. When they finally broke contact, he noticed a small bead of moisture where their hands had touched. Ambassador Nara quickly wiped her palm against her robe in a motion that seemed almost reflexive. "Is everything all right?" Dr. Han asked. "Yes, Ambassador Nera said, though her voice sounded different. The greeting was stronger than expected. Your species has powerful bioelectric fields. The formal introductions continued, but Dr. Han noticed Ambassador Nera glancing at him occasionally with what he interpreted as curiosity. The meeting proceeded into the prepared welcome center, where refreshments had been arranged based on the biological information the Ceridans had shared ahead of time. During the reception, Dr. Han found himself seated across from Ambassador Nera at a small table. I hope the traditional greeting wasn't uncomfortable for you, he said. We studied your protocols carefully, but there's always room for misunderstanding. Not uncomfortable, Ambassador Nera said, her head tilting slightly. Unexpected. Among Ceridans, such a strong response during a greeting ritual indicates compatibility. Compatibility, Dr. Han asked. Of minds and purpose, she clarified, though something in her tone suggested more. It is considered fortunate when new diplomatic relationships begin with such harmony. Throughout the remainder of the reception, Ambassador Nera asked Dr. Han numerous questions about human biology, reproduction, and genetic diversity. He answered as thoroughly as he could, assuming it was professional curiosity from one scientist to another. As the meeting concluded, Ambassador Nera approached Dr. Han one final time. We have much to learn from each other, she said. I believe our meeting today will lead to developments neither of our species could have anticipated. Dr. Han nodded, unaware of how prophetic her words would prove to be. I look forward to our future exchanges, he replied. The Ceridan delegation departed with promises of returning for more extensive talks the following week. As their ship rose silently into the evening sky, Dr. Han felt a lingering warmth in his palm where they had touched. Later that night, as he recorded his observations of the meeting, he noted the unusual sensation during the handshake, but dismissed it as simple nervousness or possibly a mild allergic reaction to alien biochemistry. He had no way of knowing that the simple act of touching hands had set in motion a chain of events that would forever alter relations between their worlds and his own life. Ambassador Nera, aboard the returning ship, placed her hand against a glowing panel, allowing the ship's medical system to analyze the genetic material she had inadvertently collected. By Ceridan standards, what had happened was clear, if unexpected. The question now was how to explain it to the humans. 2 weeks after the historic first meeting, Dr. Han sat at his desk reviewing data from preliminary studies of Ceridan biology. The aliens had been surprisingly open with sharing information about themselves, though certain aspects of their physiology remained mysterious. His concentration was broken by the urgent buzzing of his secure communication device. Dr. Han speaking, he answered. This is Director Park. The Ceridan delegation has requested an emergency meeting. Their ship just entered Earth's atmosphere without prior scheduling. They're asking specifically for you to be present. Dr. Han felt a flutter of anxiety. Did they say what this is about? No details, just that it concerns a matter of biological significance requiring your expertise. They'll be landing in 30 minutes. As Dr. Han hurried to the meeting facility, his mind raced through possibilities. Had they discovered a pathogen? Was there some incompatibility between their species they hadn't foreseen? The calm of scientific inquiry gave way to the churning uncertainty of the unknown. When he arrived, the Ceridan ship was already on the pad, its pearlescent surface gleaming in the morning light. Ambassador Nera emerged, but this time she was accompanied only by what appeared to be a medical officer, identifiable by the instruments attached to their uniform. Dr. Han. Ambassador Nera said, bowing slightly. Thank you for coming quickly. We have a situation that requires private discussion. They were escorted to a conference room where Director Park and 2 other human officials waited. Once the doors closed, Ambassador Nera stood very still for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. During our initial greeting ceremony 2 weeks ago, she began, something unexpected occurred. Something that, among our species, is considered highly significant. Dr. Han noticed she seemed to be avoiding looking directly at him. The hand contact we shared was not just symbolic, she continued. For ceridans, it is a biological exchange. Our species can, under specific conditions of compatibility, share genetic material through specialized contact points on our hands. The room fell silent. Dr. Han felt his throat tighten. Are you saying? Director Park began. Ambassador Nara finally turned to face Dr. Han directly. I am carrying genetic material from Dr. Han. In your terms, I am pregnant with a child that will contain both Ceridan and human genetic elements. Dr. Han felt the room tilt slightly. That's not possible, he said automatically. Human and alien DNA couldn't possibly be compatible. The Ceridan medical officer stepped forward. Our reproductive process is not like yours. We do not combine full genetic codes. Rather, we selectively incorporate beneficial genetic sequences from compatible donors. Our bodies evaluate and integrate only what is useful. You're saying my DNA is inside you? Dr. Han asked, his scientific mind struggling to process the implications. A small portion, yes, Ambassador Nara said. Approximately 8% of the developing child will carry human genetic markers. This is unprecedented. Never before has a Ceridan incorporated genetic material from a non-Ceridan species. Director Park looked pale. Ambassador, forgive me, but this seems like something that should have been mentioned before physical contact was made. We had no reason to believe it was possible, she replied. Our scientists believed our species too different for compatibility. The probability was considered so remote that it did not warrant mention in preliminary protocols. She paused. I assure you, this was not intentional. Dr. Han found his voice again. What does this mean exactly? What am I to this child? In human terms, you would be considered a genetic contributor, the medical officer explained. Not a father in your biological sense. The child will be Ceridan in form and function, but carry some human genetic traits. In our culture, Ambassador Nara added, this creates a profound bond. Genetic sharing is normally done with deliberate intent between individuals who wish to create a permanent alliance. It is considered a great honor. Dr. Han ran a hand through his hair. I need to understand the biology of this. The mechanism. How could our DNA possibly be compatible? We will share all relevant information, the medical officer promised. But first, we needed to inform you of the situation. Director Park cleared his throat. What are the diplomatic implications? Is this considered some kind of breach? No, Ambassador Nara said firmly. It was unexpected, but not unwelcome. Among my people, this will be seen as a powerful sign that our species are meant to form an alliance. She hesitated. However, there is something else you should know. The child will be the first of its kind. A bridge between our species. This makes it both biologically and politically significant. What does that mean for Dr. Han? One of the other officials asked. Ambassador Nara turned to Dr. Han, her large violet eyes solemn. In our culture, all genetic contributors have rights and responsibilities to their offspring. We would request that you participate in the child's development and education. This would involve cultural exchange, possibly including visits to our homeworld. Dr. Han felt as though he were in a dream. Just 2 weeks ago, he had been a respected scientist with a predictable life. Now he was being told he had helped create an interspecies child that could change the course of human-alien relations. I need time to think, he said. Of course, Ambassador Nara replied. But I should inform you that news of this development has already reached our homeworld. It is causing considerable excitement. And how long until? Dr. Han gestured vaguely. Ceridan gestation is much faster than human pregnancy. The child will be born in approximately 5 months. Director Park stood up. This is unprecedented. We'll need to form a special committee, establish protocols, consider the security implications. With respect, Ambassador Nara interrupted. While we understand the political considerations, this is primarily a matter between Dr. Han and myself. In our culture, genetic sharing creates a personal bond that stands outside political concerns. Dr. Han looked at her with new understanding. That's why you asked me all those questions about human reproduction during our first meeting. You already suspected. She nodded. I was confirming my suspicions. The sensation during our greeting was unmistakable to me, though I did not believe it possible until our medical scans confirmed it. As the meeting continued around him, Dr. Han found himself staring at Ambassador Nera's slender blue hand, remembering the tingling sensation of their first touch. Somewhere within her, a new life was forming, part human, part alien, creating a biological bridge between worlds that no one had anticipated. That evening, alone in his apartment, Dr. Han stared out at the night sky. Somewhere up there was the Ceridan homeworld, where news of his unexpected contribution to their species was causing excitement. He wondered what the child would look like, what human traits it might carry, and what his role would truly be in its life. The vidphone chimed, displaying Ambassador Nera's contact. I sense you might have more questions, she said when he answered, away from the diplomats and officials. About 1 million, Dr. Han admitted. Starting with, how do I explain to my mother that she's going to be a grandmother to an alien child? For the first time, he heard Ambassador Nera laugh, a sound like wind chimes. Perhaps, she said, we should start by explaining it to ourselves. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the newly established Ceridan Human Cultural Center as Dr. Han adjusted the settings on his tablet. For the past 3 weeks, he had immersed himself in studying Ceridan biology, culture, and history. Today marked his first formal lesson in the Ceridan language with Ambassador Nera as his instructor. The key to understanding our language is recognizing that it evolved from a species with different sensory priorities, Ambassador Nera explained, her slender blue fingers tracing patterns in the air. We perceive sound not just through hearing organs, but through skin receptors. Dr. Han attempted to reproduce a greeting phrase, but the subtle tonal shifts eluded him. I'm not sure my human vocal cords can make that sound. Your attempt was admirable, Nara said with what he had come to recognize as a smile. But perhaps more importantly, I should teach you about the developmental stages the child will go through. She activated a holographic display showing the current state of the developing embryo. Dr. Han leaned forward, his scientific curiosity momentarily overwhelming the strangeness of the situation. The tiny form already showed clear Ceridan characteristics, the beginning of 4-fingered hands, larger eye orbits, but there were subtle differences from standard Ceridan development. The integration of your genetic material has created some interesting adaptations, Nara explained. The respiratory system is developing with greater efficiency than typical Ceridan children. Our scientists believe this comes from human lung capacity genes. Fascinating, Dr. Han murmured, studying the hologram. Which other human traits are being expressed? Brain development patterns show human influences, particularly in areas associated with problem-solving and adaptive thinking. Your species excels at finding unconventional solutions, a trait our people value highly. Their daily sessions continued, expanding beyond biology into cultural norms. Dr. Han learned that Ceridan society valued genetic diversity above almost all else, a natural extension of their reproductive biology. Throughout our evolutionary history, genetic exchange has been our way of adapting to new environments. Nara explained one afternoon as they shared a meal, she with her nutrient solution, he with a simple lunch. When we encountered new challenges, we sought genetic contributors who possessed relevant traits. So reproduction is strategic rather than emotional? Dr. Han asked. Nara tilted her head, considering. Not exactly. The initial attraction, what you might call compatibility, is indeed biological and instinctive, but the decision to share genetics is deeply personal and based on admiration, respect, and often affection. And in our case, the question had been lingering in his mind for weeks. Nara's skin changed hue slightly, shifting to a deeper blue that Dr. Han had learned indicated emotional intensity. The initial exchange was accidental, but not random. Our bodies recognized compatible traits. Had there not been genuine biological harmony, nothing would have happened regardless of physical contact. The implications of her words hung in the air between them. Outside the cultural center, public reaction to news of the genetic exchange had been mixed. Some humans saw it as a promising development in interspecies relations. Others expressed concern about alien contamination or genetic theft. Security around both Dr. Han and Ambassador Nera had been increased after several protest incidents. "Your people fear what they don't understand," Nera observed after they had to use a private entrance to avoid a small group of protesters. "Some do," Dr. Han acknowledged, "but many are excited. I've received thousands of messages of support from scientists, students, and ordinary people who see this as a positive step toward greater understanding between our species." Nera nodded. "On my world, there was similar division initially. Some traditionalists argued that incorporating non-Ceridan genetics threatens our identity, but most see it as the natural extension of our evolutionary strategy." As weeks passed, their daily meetings took on a comfortable rhythm. Dr. Han found himself increasingly at ease with Nora, their conversations flowing beyond the structured curriculum into personal experiences and philosophical discussions. One evening, as they worked late comparing human and Ceridan literary traditions, Nera suddenly placed her hand on her abdomen. "What is it?" Dr. Han asked, instantly alert. "Movement," she said, her voice soft with wonder. "The first distinct motion patterns. Would you?" She hesitated. "Would you like to feel it?" Dr. Han froze, unsure of the appropriate response. This was a scientific opportunity, certainly, but it felt far more personal than their previous interactions. "Is that culturally acceptable?" he asked carefully. "For a genetic contributor, it is expected," she replied. "In our culture, all contributors maintain a physical connection throughout development." Hesitantly, Dr. Han placed his hand where she indicated. At first, he felt nothing through the strange, smooth texture of her skin. Then, a flutter, like the beating of tiny wings. "That's..." Words failed him. "Yes," Nora said simply. "That is our child." The phrase hung in the air, both alien and profound. Their eyes met, and Dr. Han felt something shift in his understanding of their situation. This wasn't just a scientific anomaly or diplomatic incident. This was a life, connected to him in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. The following week, Dr. Han was invited to a formal meeting with the Ceridan High Council via holographic communication. 7 elder Ceridans appeared in the center's conference room, their skin patterns more elaborate than Nera's, indicating their advanced age and status. "Dr. Han," the central figure addressed him, "we have been observing your dedication to understanding our ways with great interest." "I'm honored by your attention," he replied, following the protocols Nera had taught him. "The child you have helped create represents a new path for both our species," the elder continued. "We would like to formally invite you to visit our homeworld during the final developmental phase and for the birth ceremony." Dr. Han glanced at Nera, who nodded encouragingly. "I would be honored," he said, "though I'm not sure Earth's governments will approve such a journey." "Arrangements are being discussed at the highest diplomatic levels," another elder said. "We believe your presence is essential for the child's proper development." Later, after the council had disconnected, Dr. Han turned to Nera. "What aren't they telling me? There's more to this invitation than courtesy, isn't there?" Nera hesitated before responding. "The child will be the first to carry human genetics. Its development will establish how future exchanges might work. Your presence, your continued biological proximity, may influence how the human genetic material expresses itself." "You mean I need to be physically present for the child to properly develop the human traits?" "Our scientists believe so, yes. The process is ongoing, not complete at conception as in your species." Dr. Han looked out the window at the Earth landscape, contemplating what it would mean to leave his home planet, to venture to an alien world. "And if I don't go?" "The child will still develop, but possibly without full expression of the human genetic potential. Nera placed her hand gently on his arm, a gesture she had adopted from observing human interactions. But there is no obligation. The choice must be yours. As Dr. Han walked home that evening, a news alert flashed across the public screens in the city center. Human alien child. Bridge or threat. The image showed protesters outside the cultural center, alongside footage of supporters holding signs welcoming the Ceridans. His private phone rang, his mother calling, as she did each evening now, worried about her son's increasingly public role. "The Ceridans have invited me to their homeworld," he told her after their usual greetings. A long silence followed. "Will you go?" she finally asked. "I think I have to," he replied, watching the divided opinions play out on the news screens. Not just for scientific reasons or diplomatic ones, but because he struggled to articulate feelings he was only beginning to understand. Because somehow, this has become about more than science or politics. It's about showing what humans can be at our best: curious, adaptable, willing to reach beyond our own world. As he spoke the words, Dr. Han realized they were true. What had begun as an accidental touch had evolved into something that might change the course of two species, and whatever came next, he was committed to seeing it through. The morning light of Ceridonia's red sun filtered through the translucent walls of the birth chamber, casting everything in a warm glow. Dr. Han sat nervously beside Ambassador Nera, who reclined on a cushioned platform surrounded by medical devices that hummed softly. 5 months had passed since their first meeting, and now the moment they had both been anticipating had arrived. "The child is ready," announced the Ceridan birth specialist, checking readings on a floating display. "The genetic integration is complete and stable." Dr. Han reached out, hesitantly taking Nera's hand. Over the past months, they had developed a friendship that transcended their different species, united by the unique situation they shared and the challenges they had faced together. "Are you nervous?" he asked her. "Ceridans do not experience birth as humans do," she explained, her voice calm despite the momentous occasion. "The process is controlled and painless. But yes, I feel anticipation." The diplomatic crisis had eased somewhat after their public address. While extremist groups still existed on both planets, public opinion had shifted. The human-Ceridan genetic exchange was now viewed by many as a symbol of cooperation rather than contamination. Security remained tight, but they were no longer in hiding. Representatives from both worlds had gathered in an adjoining chamber to witness the birth, a carefully selected group of scientists, diplomats, and cultural experts. This would be the first time most of them would see a Ceridan birth process, let alone one involving human genetics. "It begins," the specialist said, activating a sequence on the control panel. Dr. Han watched in fascination as Nera's abdomen began to emit a soft glow. Unlike human birth, Ceridan children developed in a specialized pouch that opened externally when development was complete. The process looked more like a flower blooming than human childbirth. The chamber filled with a sweet scent as the birth membrane parted. With a gentle motion, the specialist reached forward and helped guide the small form from Nera's body. Dr. Han held his breath. The child was unmistakably Ceridan in overall appearance. The same blue-tinted skin, large eyes, and slender form, but there were subtle differences. The hands had 4 fingers like a Ceridan, but they were slightly shorter and more flexible. The eyes, while large, were darker than the typical Ceridan violet, almost black, like Dr. Han's own. "The first human Ceridan child," the specialist announced, placing the infant on a soft surface where monitoring devices hummed to life around it. "Is it healthy?" Dr. Han asked, finding his voice at last. "Completely," the specialist confirmed. "All systems functioning perfectly. The human genetic elements have integrated successfully." Nera sat up, her recovery seemingly immediate. Ceridan physiology allowed for rapid recuperation after birth. She moved to the child's side, touching its small face with gentle fingers. "She has your eyes," Nera said, looking up at Dr. Han. "And according to the genetic analysis, your problem-solving abilities and adaptability traits." Dr. Han moved closer, peering at the tiny being who carried a portion of his genetic code. "Yes, though Ceridans do not place the same significance on gender as humans, this child's physical development follows female patterns." The specialists completed their immediate assessments and then, following Ceridan tradition, left the genetic contributors alone with the newborn for the bonding period. "What happens now?" Dr. Han asked, standing awkwardly beside the birthing platform. Despite months of preparation, he still felt overwhelmed by the reality of the situation. "Now we introduce her to her world," Nera said. "In Ceridan tradition, genetic contributors share their first knowledge with the child immediately. Our young are born with active minds, ready to receive information." Carefully, she lifted the small being, cradling it close to her face. "I am Nera," she said softly. "I have given you life and form. I will teach you the ways of Ceridonia, the history of our people, and the path among the stars." She then turned, offering the child to Dr. Han. With trembling hands, he accepted the tiny bundle. The infant's eyes, dark and somehow familiar, focused on his face with surprising intensity. "I am Han," he said, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. "I have given you some of my traits from Earth, a planet far from here. I will teach you about humanity, our curiosity, our determination, and our capacity for wonder." The child made a soft sound, somewhere between a human coo and a musical note. Dr. Han felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. "What will her name be?" he asked. In their preparations, this was one detail they had not settled. Nera considered for a moment. "In our tradition, children receive names that reflect their unique attributes. Given her special nature as a bridge between worlds, I suggest Zeri. In ancient Ceridan, it means one who connects distant points." "Zeri," Dr. Han repeated, testing the name. "It's beautiful." Later that day, they presented Zeri to the assembled representatives. The room fell silent as they entered, all eyes fixed on the small being in Nera's arms. The Earth ambassador stepped forward first. "On behalf of humanity, I welcome this child as a symbol of the new relationship between our worlds." The Ceridan High Elder followed. "This day marks a turning point in our shared history. Where once we were separate travelers in the cosmos, now our paths are joined." As formal presentations continued, Dr. Han noticed a change in how the delegates interacted. The tension that had marked previous meetings had eased. People who had been cautious around each other now spoke animatedly, united by their curiosity about Zari. That evening, as Nera rested, Dr. Han sat alone with Zari in the observatory dome of the birthing center. Above them, stars filled the alien sky, some the same stars visible from Earth, but from a different angle, a different perspective. "You're going to have an interesting life," he told the child, who watched him with those dark, attentive eyes. "Not fully human, not fully Ceridan. It won't always be easy. There will be people who fear what you represent, who want to keep our worlds separate." Zeri made her musical sound again, tiny fingers reaching toward his face. "But there's something you should know," he continued. "Throughout human history, it's always been those who stand between worlds who help us move forward. The translators, the explorers, the people who can see from multiple perspectives. That's who you'll be." A week later, Dr. Han stood before the Ceridan High Council for his final meeting before returning to Earth. The diplomatic arrangements had been formalized. He would split his time between worlds, spending 3 months on Earth followed by 3 months on Ceridonia, continuing this pattern through Zeri's early development. "You have changed our understanding of what is possible," the chief elder told him. "Not just biologically, but culturally. You have shown that difference need not mean division." "I've learned the same lesson," Dr. Han replied. "When I first arrived here, everything seemed alien and strange. Now I see the connections beneath the differences." As he prepared for his journey back to Earth, Nera brought Zeri to his quarters for a private farewell. She will miss your presence, Nera said. The human elements in her respond strongly to you. 3 months will pass quickly, he assured her, though he felt the separation would be harder than he wanted to admit, and will maintain daily communication. He knelt to look directly at Zari, who was developing with remarkable speed, already able to sit up and focus intently on faces and objects. I'll be back soon, he promised. And next time, I'll bring books from Earth, music, pictures, everything you need to understand your human heritage. As his ship lifted off from Ceridonia the next day, Dr. Han watched the alien landscape recede beneath him. 6 months ago, he had been a scientist with a predictable life and limited horizons. A simple handshake had changed everything, opening doors to possibilities no one had imagined. He thought of Zari, with her dark human eyes and a Ceridan face, and smiled. Whatever challenges lay ahead, that small being represented something profound. Proof that the boundaries between species were more permeable than anyone had believed, and that the future might be shared rather than separate. As stars filled the viewport, Dr. Han began drafting his report to Earth's Scientific Council. It would begin. The birth of Zari marks not an endpoint but a beginning. We have much to learn, not just about Ceridan biology, but about our own capacity to connect across differences we once thought insurmountable.